Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Tip of the Ice-Burgh podcast, brought to you as always by InsideThePenguins.com, a proud affiliate of the Hockey News. I'm your host, Nick Brlansky, joined as always by Nick Horwat, and I know we said that we were going to have some interviews, and they are coming a little bit later this week, but for this episode, it's just going to be me and Horwat, the same thing that you get, and hopefully the same thing you enjoy on a weekly basis, but we have plenty to talk about, even though the Pittsburgh Penguins are off for the next week still. We are here talking about what we've seen through the team's first 46 games, what we think could be improved upon over the next 30-some games to get them into a postseason spot. We got plenty to talk about today. 3 reasons why the Pittsburgh Penguins scoring is so much lower than it was last season. 3 reasons why the Pittsburgh Penguins are in 27th in the National Hockey League in goal scoring right now. Certainly far away from the impetus of what this team has been over the entirety of the Sidney Crosby and Evgeny Malkin era. So we'll get into that. And then at the end of the show, Eastern Conference power rankings. We're not going to go team by team. We're just simply going to talk about where the Pittsburgh Penguins stand as far as them amongst the Eastern Conference. Obviously, it is a very, very, what's the word I'm looking for here, Horwat? There's a lot of parity in the East.
It's
right?
a tight race. You can leave it at that. It's a close race. I'm looking at the Eastern standings right now, and somehow Boston is kind of pulling away again. The Florida Panthers are up there. The Rangers are up there. Those are the 3 top teams, but it's a tight race. I mean, Penguins have 51 points. That's only a handful up on the Montreal Canadiens, who aren't supposed to be going anywhere this year. I don't even think they think they're going anywhere this year. It's all very tight. I forget at one point about a month or 2 ago when it was each team in the Metro essentially was separated by about 5 games at the most. So it's still pretty tight. It's still anyone's spots. Those wildcard spots are up for grabs essentially.
Yeah, and there's a variety of games played amongst different teams. The Pittsburgh Penguins, obviously, on the tail end of that, having a lot of games in hand on a lot of these teams, which could help them going towards the latter part of the season. But let's talk a little bit about 2 forwards right now, because I think that everybody looking at the Pittsburgh Penguins sees a lot of problems with this team, and they're not wrong to. There are a lot of issues with this team. There are a lot of areas in which they could be getting better performances. But when you look at Kyle Dubas's plan coming into the first season as Penguins general manager, it seemed simple. Rely on the top 6 to score, rely on the bottom 6 for defense. That seems like it was the plan, does it not?
It's exactly what it seemed. That was pretty evident when the trades and the signings were happening during the offseason and free agency. Riley Smith was supposed to come in and essentially be the new Jason Zucker. There was Noel Acciari coming in to obviously be a depth defensive-minded forward. There was Lars Eller coming in to be able to play both sides of the puck, but mostly that defensive acumen was what stood out. You could see it in those signings that was exactly the game plan. It was let the top 6 roll the same way it did last season. Let them do the scoring, let them have the offense, and then and pretty much, I mean, last season, we said this on quite a few occasions. Last season, the bottom 6 couldn't score or play defense. At bare minimum, this time around, they can play defense. So it was a step in the right direction. It was an improvement. And that's essentially what we're getting yet again. There has not been much scoring from the bottom 6, but that defense has been much improved, has it not?
Yeah, I think that's the one thing you have to look at when you're actually judging the bottom 6. Neither of us are going to sit here and tell you that this Penguins bottom 6, when compared to other teams' bottom 6s, is a good group. I think we all understand that there is plenty of room for improvement for the Pittsburgh Penguins in the bottom 6. But when you talk about the initial plan at the outset of the season of, hey, the bottom 6 needs to play defense and chip in scoring whenever they can, they've held up their end of the bargain. When you look at combined goals allowed, now this is not total goals because I'm talking about combined goals allowed from every single player in the bottom 6. Last season, it was 212. This year, they're on pace to only allow combined 164 goals as far as the bottom 6 is concerned. That is a marginal drop. That is a marginal difference when it comes to how good the bottom 6 has been at keeping the puck out of the Pittsburgh Penguins net. And then you look at the offensive side of things and say, all right, well, does it come with an equal drop in goal scoring? It really doesn't. Last season, 2022-23, the bottom 6 combined for 60 goals for the Pittsburgh Penguins. 2023-24, they're on pace to score 53, so only a drop of 7 goals total when it comes to goal scoring in the bottom 6, and yet the defensive side of the puck has been so much more improved. They've certainly held up their end of the bargain.
That's exactly what they were supposed to do. Stop the puck from going into their own net and contribute every so often when you can. Regardless, I think you still want to see more production from offensive production from the bottom 6, just because you can't have an extremely successful team without some sort of production on all 4 lines. That was the Penguins' bread and butter back in the 16-17 runs. It was that ability to roll 4 lines over the boards and have something there. The 17 team, the 4th line of the 17 team wasn't necessarily going to score you a ton of goals, but there was definitely some speed. And boy, this, if anything, has declined in the last few years for the Penguins. It is their speed, but being able to find some production would still be nice. I think it's at least getting that step in the right direction, and having essentially that plus minus really change has been huge.
Yeah, I think Jeff Carter is kind of like a microcosm of the entirety of the Penguins' bottom 6 right now. It's, hey, last year he was a liability for the most part. This year, he's not a liability. He's not necessarily been a massive asset for the Pittsburgh Penguins. He hasn't been contributing in ways of scoring. He's been contributing in other ways, and that's great. He's not a liability on the ice, but he's certainly not pushing the Penguins towards victories as far as keeping them from losing games. And I think that's the biggest difference with the Penguins when it comes to their bottom 6 is it's not a bottom 6 that's going to go out there and win you games. It's just a bottom 6 that's not going to lose you games. And yes, like you mentioned earlier, Horwat, that is a step in the right direction. Is it enough to push this team over the top? No. They needed their top 6 to come out and perform, and that's a completely different story when you look at the scoring from the top 6 this season. In 2022-23, the top 6 combined for 171 goals. This season, they're on pace to score 159, so not a significant drop, but a drop nonetheless. And when it gets interesting is when you look at the fact that 3 of those top 6 forwards are on pace to score more goals than they did last season. Sidney Crosby's on pace for 48 goals. That is a vast improvement on last season. Evgeny Malkin is on pace to score 29. That is a slight improvement on last season. Jake Gensel, another one that has a slight improvement that he's on pace for with 39 goals this season. And then you have Brian Rust, who's on pace to tie his goal total last season at 20. So why are they minus 12, if you want to look at it that way, in top 6 scoring this year? 2 players, Rickard Rakell and Riley Smith. They've just fallen flat.
Goose eggs, almost. May as well be. So that's what it's felt like for Riley Smith and Rickard Rakell, especially in that gap between pretty much Rakell coming back. Yeah, he scored 5 goals, but it hasn't felt great since those 5 goals. And Riley Smith, before getting hurt for about a month and a half or so, if not more, just hasn't been able to do anything. Those are supposed to be 2 keys to the top 6. I mean, we always discuss the idea of Rickard Rakell being able to flip between the first and second line and being able to produce wherever he is. And now he's muddling around on the third line because he just isn't producing. He got those 5 goals after coming back from his injury, but hasn't done much since. He's barely throwing helpers around. He's only got 18 points on the year. And Riley Smith, don't know what happened there. He was supposed to be the quote-unquote more consistent and healthier Jason Zucker. Well, guess what? Not only has his consistency gone out the door, the dude's injured. And I mean, there's nothing you can do about injuries, and that goes for Zucker as well. There was nothing anyone could do about the injuries for either player, but the production has just evaporated. He had that good run in October, finding that avalanche of production, and then kind of remaining steady for a little bit. But it seems that since then, for Riley Smith, things have just fallen off the face of the earth almost, to the point where, I mean, I know Kyle Dubas just signed him, but if he's hitting the trade block already, that was a quick turnaround.
Yeah, the good thing is the Pittsburgh Penguins got him for pretty cheap, only a 3rd-round pick. I don't know if you recoup that if you look to trade him, and we'll get to that in a second here. But I think the biggest thing about that comparison that you made there, Horwat, between when Zucker was having trouble with injuries in his early seasons with the Penguins and what Riley Smith is doing right now in his injuries, yes, you can't hold that against the players. Injuries happen. That was a hit, especially the one that that Riley Smith took. Most people, you get hit like that into the boards by, I think it was Nikita Zadorov. Either way, it was somebody from the Canucks. His arm just got caught, and he had what we assume is a wrist injury. It's an upper body injury. So yeah, it's unfortunate. The only main difference is when Jason Zucker was injured a couple seasons ago, the Penguins were better equipped to have people take his spot. They were better equipped to have somebody take his spot and not leave the spot that they were already in as a vast disadvantage. You look at what the Penguins are looking at right now. Yeah, Drew O'Connor has stepped up in a big way, and we can't say enough good things about the performance that he has had this season. But when he steps up, where does that leave the third line? Clearly not as good. Understandably, now we have Rickard Rakell in that slot, and you're hoping that he gets back to what he's doing. But the Penguins have a depth issue. If they get injuries in the top six because of the way that Kyle Dubas gambled on this team and saying the top six is going to be who we rely upon for scoring, he can't afford to have injuries, especially longer-term injuries in the top six. He's had that now twice, 3 times, honestly, if you include Brian Rust's injury. With Rust, with Rakell, and now with Riley Smith. The injuries don't help, and certainly not the performance that both of these guys have had when they've been healthy. Both of them, as you mentioned, with long, lengthy, goalless droughts. And they're making $10 million combined against the cap, $5 million split down even between the two of them, which brings me to my next question here, Horwat. With the trade deadline coming up here in just about 5 weeks, should the Penguins consider trading one or both of Rickard Rakell and Riley Smith? And that is outside of the realm of this is a rebuild versus this is buying. Should they consider trading them regardless of what they decide to do, buying or selling at the deadline?
Yeah, we can get into the buying and the selling portion of this in a minute, but at this point, I would say so. I've been saying since earlier in the season that Rickard Rakell might be one of the players that doesn't finish the year here because going into the season, at least we were expecting him to kind of be a player that can produce at a pretty good rate, score at any line that he's on, and be a pretty solid option for any team in the NHL. And he's a guy that could recoup the Penguins a ton of assets or a good player in return. It'd be a good NHL trade, a good hockey trade almost. Now it is pretty much becoming, okay, sell them off. We need pieces, and by pieces I mean assets in terms of draft picks in return. Nothing else, because you're not going to get much else for them. And as for Riley Smith, I mean, I'm always fine with giving new guys in time to sort of get with the program, let them experience everything, and then let a second year almost be the trade year. But I mean, that's not happening. There needs to be quicker turnaround for this team that wants to see production this year, because as the core ages, you just never know when the wheels will eventually fall off for them. So suddenly the Riley Smith idea has just gone out the door, and that if he's on a trade block, he's on a trade block, and find something to get in return, because again, like Rakell, it won't be that much, it seems.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned that the Pittsburgh Penguins would get assets back, whether that be prospects, whether that be players that they can plug into the lineup, which I would highly doubt for either of these guys that's what you would get, unless you try to take some salary cap back, which might be the case because both of them are a $5 million cap hit. But you're going to hopefully get space. Like, that's the biggest thing that Kyle Dubas can go out there and acquire if he's getting rid of one of these guys, is a little bit of flexibility in the offseason, because as of right now, this team is not good enough to say, hey, let's throw everything against the wall. Let's go, all out for this season. They just can't do that. This team is not good enough. This team has too many issues to afford going all out for this season. So what you need to do is try to give this team a chance this year. Yes, you should, because right now where they're sitting in the standings, the sort of play that they've had over the last couple of weeks has been up and down, but they've shown that they can still play with some of the best teams in the National Hockey League. They can go toe-to-toe with some of these very, very talented teams whenever they want to. They just haven't been able to find the consistency. So I think you give them an opportunity. I don't think you sell the farm, but what I think you have to do is start trying to make some small, subtle moves for next season and for the offseason to not only give yourself a little bit of space under the salary cap, but also give some of these younger players a chance. You look at what Valtteri Pustin was able to do in the top six when he was initially called up. You're not taking that big of a gamble by giving him Riley Smith's minutes by trading Riley Smith, simply because you open up the cap space. Valtteri Pustin is a much, much cheaper player, and you get the opportunity to, if he works out, go and address something else in the offseason. So I think that's probably the reason why I would trade one of them for sure this season, whether that's Rickard Rakell or Riley Smith. That becomes a debate for another day, and that's something we can debate until the cows come home. But I think one of them for sure should at the very least be on the trade block, simply to open up some space, to give Kyle Dubas some flexibility in the offseason, and to try to open that window towards next season while still giving this team an opportunity with some talented players in the lineup.
Yeah, and the issue, not even so much the issue, but that seems to be what might be what's happening here.
Maybe.
Elliot Friedman was on NHL Network last night. I wrote about it this morning that the Penguins are priming themselves for a soft rebuild. Now, what that exactly means is still to be determined, I think, because for what it's worth, if this team believes and Kyle Dubas believes that they can win still this year somehow, then don't expect many moves to be made, because they'll just try and roll with the team. They're already not going to be buyers, it seems. They're just going to be maybe a small addition here, maybe a couple of trades out for assets like you're mentioning. But a soft rebuild likely means Jake Guentzel might find his way out as well in this conversation. Mm-hmm. The two we've been talking about already, Riley Smith and Rickard Rakell, also maybe shipped out. And the prediction would essentially be, maybe you compete a little bit this year. Maybe you recoup assets this year. But next year is going to be a different year. I'd expect maybe almost a complete overhaul of the lineup again. I don't know exactly what a soft rebuild means, but Elliot Friedman put it that it could be 2 or 3 years until something really happens here. So we'll see what happens. It's going to be quite interesting. And I mean, I know we had all this discussion about Smith and Rakell, but Jake Guentzel's going to be a pretty big sign of where things are going, because that's your big chip. That's your big piece that if the Penguins are going in the direction of time for something quick to still have a good team while Crosby is still around. I mean, I think when it comes to the list of untouchables, if they're going even in a soft rebuild, it shortens quickly. It becomes just key prospects, Crosby, you said Pettersson, and I agree with that. And maybe one of, and not both, one of Letang or Malkin. Carlson, there's not much you can do. There's not much you can do. He's not necessarily an untouchable. He is just an immovable.
Yeah.
But if he can find his game, that's fine. That's a good problem to have. But there's just nothing going on with Carlson in terms of moving him. But that's about the list. Everyone else that's not bolted to the ground could be out.
Yeah. Flexibility, assets, that's what Kyle Dubas is going to be looking to do. Try to keep this team as competitive as possible while trying to just kind of get as much as he can. And when you talk about that, it all points the arrow to one thing this offseason, that the Pittsburgh Penguins are going to need top 6 forwards. Last year, there was a lot of issues. They tried to reshape this defense. They tried to reshape the bottom 6. They had decisions to make in net. Their goaltender's locked up, at least their primary goaltender. Their defense, at least the top 4, is all locked up. Whether or not you make a trade to try to shift something around is a different question. But it seems as if you're going to this soft rebuild, and like Elliot Friedman suggests, then it seems like it's going to be all top 6 forwards that end up being the topic of conversation between now and March 8th to open up that cap space and to give players these opportunities. I already talked about Valtteri Puustinen. Drew O'Connor has certainly stepped up into a top 6 role this season and impressed. Maybe you see a guy like Sam Poulin or Jesse Puljujärvi get an opportunity at the NHL level. Whether that's in the top 6 or the bottom 6 remains to be seen, but the Penguins have not many, but they have some options to try to keep this team at least balancing on a playoff spot while trying to open the window a little bit for next year and give Kyle Dubas some space to breathe going into the offseason. So it'll be interesting. Obviously, Dubas mentioned that he wanted to give the team till the All-Star break. He told TSN, I believe it was last week, that he's going to give them a little bit longer, and they're going to show him the course of action that he should take. I don't know if I necessarily agree with that. I know back on December 11th when he said he was going to give them to the All-Star break, I looked at you and I said, oh, that seems a lot longer than I would give them. But now that they're giving them even longer, listen, I'm just here to monitor and react, because I'm not going to try to predict what's going to happen. Kyle Dubas sitting on his hands. He certainly thinks there's another shoe to drop with this Penguins team, and we'll have to sit back and wait and see what it is. Maybe it's the power play, and that's what I want to talk to you about, Horwat, in the second segment. Mike Sullivan, he threw the power play in a little bit of a blender over the weekend. A lot of people saying, finally, you address this horrid part of the Pittsburgh Penguins game. We'll address it in the second segment here on the Tip of the Iceberg. Welcome back to the Tip of the Iceberg podcast. Before we get started talking about some big changes on the power play, Horwat, I saw a comment on YouTube. I believe it was after the Montreal Canadiens game and the game recap that I say the Pittsburgh Penguins formally a lot on the podcast. And he said, what is this, a drinking game? Jesus. I mean, honestly, I've noticed it now more often in yesterday's recording and today's recording. I'd try to stop it, and I might, but I kind of like the idea of there being a drinking game after me. So maybe we're just going to keep going the way we have been.
It's just the way it is. Sometimes it's the name of the team.
It is
one way or the other.
You don't have to say it as formally as I do all the time, but that's just wired into my brain.
If you think in writing like I do, it's always Pittsburgh Penguins upon first mention.
Yep.
And then always team name, and then you can flip-flop back and forth. When it comes to team names, you could say just Pittsburgh, you could say just Penguins. You almost never do it Pittsburgh Penguins again unless it's a quote.
Yep.
Much like naming, just like a name, a player's name or a person's name in a story. First and last upon first mention, last name only for the rest, unless there's a relative, and then it gets finicky. But regardless, unless you think like I do, it's I don't notice it as much as that person did, obviously, but
apparently that's the first time I've seen it. We've been on YouTube now for over a year and a half. That's the first time I've seen it. So if you notice it going forward, I don't apologize. I don't care. It's the way I talk. But Horwat, maybe you open the door for yourself there. The AP style handbook, as maybe you have the Point Park hat on. Maybe you can go back and be a professor here in the near future.
I would pull out my AP style book, but it's currently under my laptop, giving it a little lift right now. So
there you go. Well, yeah, let's not mess with the camera shot here, because that would be a abuse of the other side of the AP style, which is the video side that we currently do. But let's talk about the power play right now, because the Pittsburgh Penguins, there it is, they shifted some things around over the weekend after a 1-for-6 start against the Florida Panthers. Mike Sullivan threw his offensive lines into a blender on the power play. 1-for-6. They go on the one opportunity in the late stages of the third period. They throw out on the first power play unit Sidney Crosby, Jake Gensel, Brian Rust, Valtteri Puustinen, and Chris Letang. That unit over the next game and a half registered 4 shots on goal and 7 scoring chances in 2 minutes and 20 seconds of power play time. Second unit was Malkin, Rickard Rakell, Jeff Carter, Lars Eller, and Erik Karlsson. They registered 0 shots on goal and 2 scoring chances in just about 1 minute and 40 seconds of power play ice time. So before we get into whether or not this is sustainable, because they have played similar ice time in the 3 power play chances they've gotten since, what did you think of the changes, especially the timing of them late in a game when you're down a goal?
That shows that, when you're making that change late in a game down a goal, that shows that you are hoping and trying, not only hoping to see something change, but also forcing the notice. Kind of, I'm trying to think of the right way of putting it. You're essentially showing them that this needs to happen. Like, you guys need to figure it out. It's a little bit more hard-nosed from a coaching standpoint. Like I said, it is more of a, you guys haven't figured it out. This is a clutch moment. If we it essentially shows that the coaching staff finally stopped believing in the group. That's what I was getting at. It was, if we believed in you, we would have let you go out in that clutch opportunity. But because they didn't, they said, this is the time we need to change it right now. There's no other, it's not going to get any better. And they need anything. And sure, it may have felt like a throwing things against the wall and seeing what sticks moment, but because of the timing of it, there was a little bit more heaviness to it. And it all honestly showed that it was going to stick around for the next game, because it's exactly what it did. And maybe that first one against Florida didn't look as great. Those 2 that I think it was 2, right? 2 that they got against Montreal. Far better. They didn't score, but they got generated chances. Crosby had an open net that he doesn't normally miss.
Rolling puck. The excuse, the commentator's handbook excuse. Oh, the puck was rolling. Man, he's the greatest player of all time.
The
He should
net was
spot
also
that.
wide open.
Yes.
But yeah, they got their chances. Both
Mhm.
sides seem to understand that, hey, there's a reason why this is the setup right now. There's a reason.
Yeah, and I think it also, sorry, go ahead,
No,
finish
you're
your.
good. I had nothing else to it. Just more or less, maybe it goes back, but they now have to understand that was the reason why it was like that.
Yeah, and I think it also caught the attention because it wasn't just dipping your toe into some changes. It wasn't just, hey, we're going to put Letang on the left flank now, or hey, we're going to put Raquel on the left flank now. Those minuscule changes have been made all season long, although Letang hasn't gone to the left flank since practically preseason, I'm pretty sure. I think I'd have to go back through, but I don't think he's played the left flank at all on the power play this season, even though that's what they initially thought that the plan was going to be. But it was Malkin and Carlson. You're off the top unit. You're not going out there.
Yeah.
And then they put on who? A rookie in
Mhm.
Valtteri Puustinen and Chris Letang. Now, something about Valtteri Puustinen, he went onto that power play unit in December, and it provided a spark. It ended the 0-for-38 streak, and they scored a couple of goals in a couple of straight games. They had 2 multi-goal performances on the power play in that week alone. Something about him seems to just generate opportunities for the top power play unit. It's not like the second power play unit was fantastic with him on it, but on the top power play unit, I don't know if it's his puck retrieval skills, because that's something that I think should be looked at, is the way that he's able to go and get those loose pucks, how quickly he's able to get to them, and how he knows what to do with the puck once he gets there. I think that's a big part of his game, but something about him and Letang and the way that that unit worked. And you mentioned in the late one against the Florida Panthers, the top unit looked great for the first 59 seconds because that's all they got. They got a couple of opportunities. The puck never left the zone when those guys were there. They got a couple of shots on goal. They had Bobrovsky sprawling a little bit. They come off the ice. 2 seconds later, the offensive zone faceoff is taken, and the puck squirts past Evgeny Malkin and out into the zone. And then Erik Karlsson tries to come back in on the breakout. He turns the puck over, and it goes out of the zone. So, again, they split it 50-50, but I don't think the performance was anywhere near 50-50 when it comes to what these two units looked like. The top unit looked much better than we've seen the power play look in countless weeks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's, again, you're not going to score every time, but at the same time, you have to find some relative consistency and look threatening. At least look threatening, because this is something that I texted you about against Florida, and it was very evident against Florida because teams know going into games where their opponents stand in terms of how good their power play or penalty kill is. And when you're the Penguins rolling into teams holding the 31st out of 32 ranked power play, it's, oh, okay, play them hard, take a few, because it's not going to matter. They're not going to score on them. And I think I don't want to say that was necessarily the game plan from Florida. I think things just got out of hand.
Yeah.
But the Panthers took 8 penalties. The Penguins scored on the first one before things really happened. They scored in the opening couple of minutes before.
Yeah. That was kind of the start of it, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Because it was the delayed penalty that Matthew Tkachuk shot the puck into the net. So that was the start of it. They went and made them pay there, and then the rest of the game just went off the handles because Jeff Carter did the same thing.
Yeah, it was from that point on, though, it was the Panthers knew that the Flyers, oh boy, the Panthers knew that the Penguins weren't going to score on the power play. So it was, all right, fine, take a few, play them hard, try and get under their skin. If you take a penalty, no big deal. They're not going to score on it anyway. That's a mindset that plenty of teams can take into games against the Penguins now without a threat of, because when teams go in to play the Edmonton Oilers, it's essentially don't take penalties against them. They're going to score. You're going to be down by 2 all of a sudden. But when you're going against teams that just don't have their power play working or don't look threatening whatsoever, go ahead, play them a little harder, play them a little chippier. If you take 1 or 2, so be it. They're not going to do anything anyway. In fact, you might even get an offensive opportunity while shorthanded.
Yeah.
And I think at the bare minimum against Montreal again was a much more ease game. But the Penguins at least had a power play, at least a first unit, that looked kind of threatening.
Yeah.
So it's a step in the right direction for getting teams to not, commit crimes against you.
I was going to say take liberties, but yeah. To the extent that we saw some of the things happening in the Florida Panthers game. I wouldn't say commit crimes, but assault is there.
It's there. To be
assaultive
fair,
things.
one more side note, and then we can get off of it. If Matthew Tkachuk connected on half the things he was trying to connect on
Yeah.
Penguins players, I think we'd be talking about at least 3 other injuries. I'm not even kidding.
Yeah,
There was like, I know Tkachuk goes after guys. There was something a little different about certain attempts he was going for.
He was wound up in
Yeah.
that game, and I'm not sure what it's going to look like because they play once again, I believe, on Valentine's Day. There's not going to be a lot of love lost between the Penguins and the Panthers in that one. But you mentioned it. It's not even that you have to score a goal every single time. It's build some momentum, carry some momentum, put the momentum in your team's favor when you're out there. If you're not going to score, at least do that. Penguins haven't been doing that for the majority of the season. So we saw that on Saturday against the Canadiens. And I think that's something that you're hoping, at least going forward, once they continue to do that, the goals start to come. And, you know, the bar is set very low. They're 31st in the league, like you mentioned. You can't get much worse than this. You could go to 32nd in the league, which would be the first time since 1984. Shout out to Bob Grove. But you know, you can't get much worse. And at this point, it's been hurting this team so much that any progress is going to be a huge, huge advantage for the Penguins going forward. But the question that I have for you is, we saw only 3 power plays, but they've been trying to split them down the middle as evenly as humanly possible, probably to kind of balance the egos that you have on that second unit. Not to say that it's a bad thing that some of these guys have egos. Listen, if you're going to be at the top of the game, one of the best players in the history of the league, you're going to have a little bit of an ego to stay there for as long as both of these guys and Malkin and Carlson have. But you do have egos to balance if you're Mike Sullivan. So that second unit got a minute 40. First unit got 2:20. Do you think that 2-shift idea is sustainable for a power play, at least for the remainder of this season?
No, not when the second unit can't do anything. It comes down to who can score, because we've also seen on quite a few occasions this year, the first unit, even if as previously constructed with Carlson, Malkin, and company, stay out there for a complete 2 minutes almost. We've seen the second unit get no time on a single opportunity. So, most of the time when they're out there for the full 2 minutes, is because they have possession and they are attacking and they are getting good chances. But I would assume that the new look first unit will have something similar, because they've already proven they can attack, they can threaten, and they can be a productive group if they can just find the net.
Yeah.
So I would say that that sort of 50-50 split isn't something that'll stick around, and nor is it something that should stick around.
No, it's similar, and I talked about this yesterday on Ice-Burgh To Go. I liken it to the starting quarterback situation. If you have 2 starting quarterbacks, you really don't have one. If you have 2 power play units, you really don't have one, because most teams don't have to even think about their second power play. You talked about the Edmonton Oilers. You know, it changes the way teams play, like you mentioned, at 5-on-5, and that is a huge, huge thing. The Penguins... right now, it changes the way teams play in a bad way. It makes them play harder against the Pens at 5-on-5. And the Penguins are a great 5-on-5 team. All analytics speak to the fact that the Penguins are great at 5-on-5. Their finishing is down, their power play is down, and those 2 things could be the poison pill that keep the Penguins outside of a playoff spot for the second consecutive season. Where do they rank in the Eastern Conference, Horwat? That's what we're going to talk about here after this quick break, because we've reached the All-Star break. The Penguins are in a very muddled race for this wild card and the bottom of the Metropolitan Division top 3. So it's very interesting. Where do they stand amongst the Eastern Conference? They played every single one of these teams. We've seen the Penguins match up with every single team in the National Hockey League outside of the Winnipeg Jets and the Edmonton Oilers, the first of which will be remedied next Tuesday night when they get back in action. But let's talk about where they stand in the Eastern Conference right after this break. Welcome back to the Tip of the Ice-Burgh podcast, brought to you as always by Inside the Penguins, a proud affiliate of the Hockey News. Horwat, we've reached an unofficial halfway point of the season here with the All-Star break. We all know the halfway point was about 2 weeks ago when you hit the 41 game mark. But once you get to the All-Star break, that's when everybody starts looking around, starts to take stock of where everybody else is. Personally, in my head, because I haven't paid too much attention to the Western Conference, I still had the thought process that the LA Kings were one of the best teams in the league. They have struggled mightily. mightily. I believe it's 2-8-6 or something in their last 14 or 15 games. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think they've obviously dropped out of the top three because the Edmonton Oilers have won 16 straight games. So the Western Conference is an enigma in its own right. But then you look at the Eastern Conference, I see this in tiers, and I'll get into that in a second. The question that everybody wants to know, and by everybody I mean me because I wrote it on the damn rundown, where do you see the Penguins ranking in the Eastern Conference as of right now?
Oh, I would say higher than what they're standing at. I really would.
Okay.
Because I look at the teams that are in front of them in the wild card race. They're tied with the Devils and Capitals. Listen, the Devils had a outstanding year last year.
Mm-hmm.
I was not a believer then, and I'm not saying I'm proving myself right here by saying that they're out of the playoffs at the moment. They could still absolutely show me up, but at the moment I'm in the right in saying they were a one-hit wonder that can absolutely come back next year and be the real deal for real this time, because I just saw their progression as a little quicker than it should have been. I thought right here, right now is where they were. Next year's going to be a scary year for them. The Penguins are far better than the Capitals, and you cannot convince me otherwise. Well, Alex Ovechkin has 8 goals this year, guys.
Yeah.
What? Yeah, they are far better than the Capitals this year. Buffalo and Montreal, like I said, they're a few points behind the Penguins, but obviously I'd say they're fodder that's not going to make it. Again, look for them next year. The Islanders are a point ahead. I don't know. They play such a weird style that they have 12 overtime losses. It's the only reason why they're the head of the Penguins right now, by the way.
Yeah.
And the Red Wings, I mean, they're 6 points up. Sorry. I don't know. I'd say the Penguins are better than the Red Wings, but I need to see them play each other one more time to really put that one through. The Flyers weren't supposed to be this good. And I mean, the Leafs, who knows what the hell is going on there?
Yeah.
Who knows? Everyone else, I can absolutely see why and how they're better than the Penguins at the moment, like the Hurricanes, the Lightning, the Panthers, the Bruins. I get it. The Leafs are just a question mark. I don't know if the Penguins are better. I mean, on paper, definitely not. But something weird going on in Toronto. So I would say that if it's broken down into tiers like you're saying, I don't know what your tiers look like, but I would say the Penguins are in that second tier, higher in that second tier too, that they are just get that power play rolling and we have a completely different story. Find a little bit more production from Erik Karlsson. We have a different story. Get a couple of more goals from the bottom six. Or how about Raquel and Smith? It's a completely different team. The Penguins could easily catch the Flyers.
Yeah, if they put things together and become the team, even without help from, we talked about a couple of AHLers that are lighting the world on fire, and right now in Sam Poulin, and I don't even know if you want to consider Jesse Puljujärvi an AHLer. He's an NHLer coming back from a double hip surgery, but he's certainly lighting the world on fire at the AHL level. Now, will that translate if the Penguins end up signing him and bringing him to the National Hockey League? Probably not at the level that he's at right now. If so, then the Penguins found a diamond in the rough, and they're probably in the playoffs regardless if he ends up being that. But again, temper your expectations for Jesse Puljujärvi if he does come up to the National Hockey League level. But right now, plain and simple, I put the Pittsburgh Penguins at 8th in the conference. If I'm power ranking the Eastern Conference, I have them at 8th. And I told you that the way I came to that was breaking things down into tiers. There is a surefire top tier of 4 teams, in my opinion. The Boston Bruins and the Florida Panthers are pretty untouchable when it comes to their ability to come in and night out and be a very good hockey team. The Carolina Hurricanes, when they put it all together, are a very good hockey team. And the same goes for the New York Rangers. They got off this year on a red-hot start, and now people on Broadway are losing their minds because they're hitting a lull. But
every team's going to hit a lull. That's the way it is.
And Igor Shesterkin's not having a great season. So, all things considered, that is a team that at their best is a top tier team in the Eastern Conference. That's where I cut it off for the top tier.
Yeah.
I think there is a very small second tier where it's this team's better than the pack that's all fighting for a playoff spot, but they're not untouchable like the top 4. And that's the Tampa Bay Lightning. And I struggled. I almost put the Tampa Bay Lightning in this tier by themselves. And I have the Toronto Maple Leafs there.
Yeah.
Because I think if they find a modicum of goaltending, they're upper second tier, close to the top tier. But they just haven't had goaltending. They're relying on Martin Jones, for God's sake, right now.
Yeah, there's I'm trying to write up my tiers as well a little bit as you speak. And I'm totally agreeing with you on those top 4 teams. Before I even get to tier 2, though, I have tier 1, Boston, Florida, New York, Carolina. Before I even get to tier 2, I just have 3 question marks. Like, what exactly are these two teams? And that is Tampa Bay and Toronto.
Yeah.
Because on paper, Toronto should be far better than what they are. But goaltending and also slumps from certain people, not doing them well. Tampa Bay, you didn't have the goaltender.
Vasilevsky.
Yeah, thank you. Didn't have Vasilevsky to start the season. Okay. Well, your captain's also angry. But you also have, how is no one discussing the fact that Nikita Kucherov has 80-plus points already this season?
Yeah, he's ridiculous.
Hello? Yeah. And so does Nathan McKinnon, but that's a different story.
Yeah.
But yet you're not, at the top level. Don't know. So, what exactly is that team? Also, they really are just a couple points away from falling out of a playoff spot as well. And then, like I said, that's where I put the Penguins up, because I feel like they're better than every other team that we're about to discuss.
Yeah, that's exactly where I put them as well. I put them at, wait a minute. Let me see if I did my math there correctly. 4 + 2 is 6. Oh no, I have them at 7th in the Eastern Conference right now. I have them at the top of the 3rd tier. I think there is another delineation point there after Tampa and Toronto, and then you have the rest of the teams, personally. And I think Pittsburgh leads the way there. And honestly, that might be why I put them in 8th. I have them kind of on even ground with the Detroit Red Wings, because that Red Wings team is intriguing.
Yeah.
Because they have a variety of experience. They have a variety of different types of players. That's an intriguing team. I'm not sure if they're a team that, with the Yzer plan in effect, I'm not sure this is the season that they push into a postseason. They're obviously hoping that they do, but I'm not exactly sure where to place them. But I 100% know the Penguins, in my eyes, based on what I've seen this season, are better than the Philadelphia Flyers, are better than the New Jersey Devils, are better than the Washington Capitals, and are better than the New York Islanders. And that's the rest of the teams that I have in tier 3. Everybody else is in the 4th tier and the bottom tier. Yeah. But I think the Penguins have a case for certainly against all those teams in the Metropolitan Division, especially when I've seen them go head to head. Yes, the Devils have the Penguins number, but the Devils are a team that are struggling to stay healthy right now. Let's not forget Jack Hughes has missed a handful of games this season. That is absolutely massive for them. And I just feel like something seems off with that organization this year. Philadelphia is magic beans that is going to run out. And Washington, even though they went out to a 4-1 lead against the Penguins, they got absolutely shelled in the second and third period and are lucky they didn't lose that game. So I have the Penguins above those teams. Now, I might be wrong. Maybe I'm looking at it with rose-colored glasses here as we're separated from a couple days from the games, but I feel like the Penguins are at the top of that 3rd tier, which would put them in 7th or 8th place in the conference, depending on where you have them versus the Detroit Red Wings.
Like I said, if the Penguins were able to really figure out certain things, they'd be up in that top tier as well. Because there is Sidney Crosby having an MVP caliber season. There's Jake Gensel putting up a great year in a contract season. Evgeny Malkin, has been sloppy at times, but it's still Evgeny Malkin. Chris Letang has looked great on the defensive side of the puck. If certain things could figure themselves out, they'd be up there. And what's really fun about the Detroit Red Wings as I'm looking at it, you mentioned they have the skaters, they have the offense and the defense that are able to really carry a good team. That goaltending is a question mark, though. Alex Lyon's been good. He's been pretty good. He's got, in his last 5 appearances, 3-2. Pretty solid, not bad. But is he their starter? And if Alex Lyon is your starter, I know what he did last season, but that doesn't strike me as formidable almost. Ville Husso as a starter does a little bit more than Alex Lyon, but I just had his numbers up from the last 5, and he is not doing great. Oof, yeah. 1, 3, and 1 in his last 5 starts. So, he didn't even get those last 2 decisions. All right, well, that's, in my mind, he should have been the starter. So who knows exactly how Detroit plays their goaltending hand. Also, Ville Husso is hurt now that I'm looking at the dates of those.
Yes.
So you have James Reimer as your backup. That's a questionable team, man. Questionable. So I can see the Penguins at the moment, because the Penguins can't figure their own nonsense out, being at the same level as the Red Wings, where it's both of these teams could easily be better with certain things going in the proper direction.
Yeah, the Penguins, certainly when you look at them versus the Red Wings versus the Flyers versus the Devils versus the Caps versus the Islanders, I would assume most people would say the Penguins, if you look at what they've done this season as far as goaltending wise, are one of the top two teams there. I would say the Islanders probably. I would take Ilya Sorokin, and I think their backup is still Semyon Varlamov. I'd probably take them over a lot of these teams, but I'd take the Penguins duo over everybody else in that lineup there, as
Yeah,
certainly the lineup you just mentioned with Ville Husso and Alex Lyon. And listen, Alex Lyon, people might get, a couple trembles because of what he was able to do with the Panthers to kick the Penguins outside of the playoffs. But let's not forget, Penguins kicked themselves out of the playoffs last season, not
yeah,
Alex Lyon. Like, he got the Panthers to the playoffs, but the Penguins are the reason that the Penguins missed the playoffs. We all know that. But I think that at their best, the Penguins have proven they can play with anybody in this league on any given night. They just need to find a little bit more consistency. Only 2 win streaks of more than 2 games this season, or what? You're not going to make the playoffs doing that. They have a 3-game win streak and a 5-game win streak, and outside of that, they haven't won more than 2 straight. They need to start stacking these wins, especially when you talk about the games in hand, because if you can win those games in hand, not only are you right back in the thick of things points-wise, but you're in a playoff spot and you're getting closer to separating yourself from the Washington Capitals of the world, from the New York Islanders of the world, from the New Jersey Devils. So the Penguins need to start stacking wins coming out of this All-Star break, and I think that is the biggest thing for them. Build on the momentum that you create, because a lot of the time, we've seen it in games, we talked about it too. When you get momentum, when you score a goal, they automatically give it up the momentum. And whether that's giving up a goal or whether it's just playing on your back on your heels for the next whatever 3, 4, 5 minutes, the Penguins haven't been able to build on momentum at all this season. That's what they need to do coming out of the break. And hopefully, wherever they're at, whatever beaches or ski slopes, people like different things, wherever they're at on their vacation, they're getting a good rest, because they're going to need to start building and stacking as the season goes on if they want to keep their playoff hopes alive and if they want to get back to postseason hockey, which at the end of the day is what we all want to see them do.
of course. Yeah, it's a matter of finding that consistency. And I think you could probably ask anyone in that locker room, what is the key to getting back to the certain level. Every single one of them is just going to say just finding consistency. Every single one of them. That's been the biggest issue. And we could discuss the power play all day. We could discuss goaltending all day, even though it's been pretty good, sloppy at times, but pretty solid. It's just going to be consistency.
Yeah. So we look at the Penguins. Do I think there's room for them to improve in the Eastern Conference when it comes to ranking them? Yeah, I think there's some space there. I think the Toronto Maple Leafs are catchable. I think the Tampa Bay Lightning this year are catchable. If the Penguins can put together, I don't know, maybe even the 23rd ranked power play in the National Hockey League, they're probably close into that second tier. They probably are. So that's what they need to do, a better power play, and they need to get more out of their $5 million wingers, as we discussed. And if you can't get more out of them, then open up the space, trade them, and give opportunities to guys like Sam Poulin, who is currently playing well at the AHL level, to Valtteri Puustinen, who has looked good in the top 6 and has looked fine in the bottom 6 as well. He's getting less opportunities, but he's still making some pretty good chances out of those opportunities, and he's certainly doing a lot in the eyes of the coaching staff to get more responsibilities, especially in the bottom half of the lineup, and see him start to climb in that ice time once again. I think that's something that is showing me that Valtteri Puustinen is a player that Mike Sullivan wants to keep on this team as long as he possibly can. So we'll have to keep our eye out on things. We have plenty to discuss the rest of the week. We have an interview coming up on Thursday with Jordan DeFigio of the Penguins Fly Game Day podcast. So make sure you tune into that on Thursday, and we'll have plenty of content for you throughout the rest of this bye week through the All-Star weekend and getting you set for the latter half of the NHL season. Penguins against the Winnipeg Jets 1 week away from today. It's a lot of time without hockey, but not a lot of time without hockey talk. We'll be here on Inside the Penguins on YouTube or anywhere you get your podcast from at Tip of the Iceberg. We'll see you guys next time.